Chosen ones, tune in, lock in. Because what you're about to hear isn't just a message. It's a confirmation. This isn't for the crowd. It's for the called. And if your soul has been restless, your spirit pacing, and your silence louder than any shout, then you already know this moment isn't random. It's the revelation the universe has been holding in its mouth, waiting for you to walk in the door. Didn't open. It exploded, because truth doesn't ask permission. It waits for alignment, and that alignment just flipped the switch. They thought they were coming against you, but they were clashing with the current of the universe itself. And now the current is crashing back. The water they stirred is now dragging them under the very mouths that once whispered poison about you, are choking on silence. The hands that tried to sabotage your path are gripping rubble, trying to hold on to the illusion you outlived. You warned them not with malice, but with mercy. But mercy, unheeded, always turns into the message they never wanted to hear. So tell me, how many times did you have to carry what crushed others just because you saw what no one else could admit? Before we dive deeper, I want to pause and give a heartfelt thank you to everyone who supported this mission through super thanks. Whether you've donated before, are considering it now, or are simply here, watching you matter. Your presence is power. Your support helps fuel the messages the world isn't ready for, but needs to hear. So whether you give or don't give, just know this. We are grateful beyond words that you walked this road with us. You sensed the shift before the earthquake hit. You felt the cracks forming under what they called stability. And while they laughed, danced, and dismissed your clarity as drama, you stood in the weight of a spiritual knowing that came straight from the center of your calling. You didn't need a degree to validate your discernment. You didn't need applause to walk in alignment. You weren't reacting to their noise. The scene was reacting to you. Isn't it wild how the ones they mocked as overthinkers end up being the exact ones who read the room? Right, all along. Your very presence tilts the room, not because of volume, but because of vibration. Your light exposes what their masks can't hide from. That's why they recoiled. Not because you were wrong, but because you were clear. You didn't wear a title. You were the title. And that haunted them, because when the universe chooses you, it doesn't go through their committee. It goes through your scars, your silence, your obedience. And now, while they pace and panic trying to patch the mess you warned them about, you stand steady. No gloating, no revenge, just receipts. You weren't born to fit into the illusion. You were created to confront it. That's why your voice felt like heat. That's why your absence became a mirror. They wanted a feel-good prophet. You came as a siren. They prayed for protection, but rejected the warning. Now the very people they crowned are exposed. The fakes, the frauds, the puppets. Exactly the ones your spirit flagged from the start. Have you noticed how the faces they once celebrated are now the ones they pretend they never followed? If your body has felt the shift before your mind could explain it, if your intuition has been ringing non-stop while your environment stayed strangely still, if your quiet moments have been filled with a roar you couldn't explain, this is for you. Drop 777 in the comments as a sign that your knowing wasn't delusion. It was divine. Your solitude wasn't abandonment. It was boot camp. You weren't being punished. You were being positioned. And now, beloved chosen ones, the universe is about to stamp everything your gut has been whispering all along. Every crazy thought, every warning they called overthinking, every vibe you couldn't shake. It's all lining up one domino at a time. Are you ready to witness what happens when prophecy meets proof? Let this message reach every soul who felt the tremble before the world admitted the quake. If this lit something in your spirit, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Push this energy forward. Hit subscribe. And if you want to go further, drop a super Thanks to help us keep this prophetic wave alive. But whether you support financially or just by presence, thank you. Your listening heart is already a gift. The masks are falling, the echoes are growing, and your name is no longer dismissed. It's remembered. Let's begin, God's chosen ones. The community's in shock. You saw it coming before anyone. Music, else chosen one. They called you wild because they couldn't categorize you. They laughed at your intensity, dismissed your warnings, and mocked your stillness. But now look around, the storm they're running from is moving precisely along the path you laid out. You didn't just predict chaos. You felt it humming beneath the surface long before it cracked open. You weren't paranoid. You were perfectly aligned. What they couldn't face wasn't your words, but what your presence revealed about their own delusions. When you stayed quiet, it wasn't because you lacked insight. It was because your silence was doing the work. It was decoding, sensing smoke before the flames peeling back layers they swore would never be touched. And now that the building's on fire, they're scrambling toward the same voice they once labeled unstable, hoping, maybe even praying, that you still know the language of survival. Do you see it now? You weren't just reading people. You were reading environments. You were sensing entire spiritual and social systems, seeing through polished smiles, fake alliances, and covert agendas. You read it like an ancient language. Only the chosen understand, etched deep into your bones. While they laughed with blindfolds on, you were decoding the blueprint in real time. And now that the system is collapsing, you're still standing while they tremble. Why? Because you never relied on the illusions they clung to. The static they called normal was already a warning siren in your soul. Can you feel the confirmation settling in? Think about Harriet Tubman. She wasn't just guiding people out of slavery. She had a vision so profound that even in the dark, she knew where freedom lived. They called her mad, said she was reckless, but her vision was never chaotic. It was calibrated by heaven. You too carried what others couldn't decode. The burden you bore was never emotional, noise. It was knowledge, strategic, sacred, and divinely timed. Meanwhile, they carried shame and the weight of secrets. That's why they labeled you unstable. Because if your insight proved true, their entire house of illusions had to come down. And now that house is dust for nothing, is hidden that will not be made manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. Luke 8:17. When your spirit scanned a room, you saw what others pretended didn't exist. You sensed energy. You felt tension before words were spoken. You knew when a smile was masking sabotage. And when they came against you, they weren't just fighting a person. They were pushing against the divine current that surrounds those who are chosen. And that current pushes back stronger, smarter, and always on time. Have you ever wondered why they were so triggered by your peace? Why did your presence feel like pressure in a room full of people who were trying to distract you from your peace? Had something to hide. Think of whistleblower Edward Snowden. His revelations shook governments because he saw through the systems, not from the outside, but from within. Like him, your inner knowing threatened those who relied on secrecy. They weren't reacting to your actions. They were reacting to the collapse of their control. When you entered the room, they underestimated your discernment. They thought you were the storm, but in reality, you were just the forecast. You didn't ask to be chosen. You were appointed. Your strength wasn't a decision. It was a divine design when you cried by yourself, thinking that the pressure would crush you. Heaven was strengthening your spine. You weren't being punished. You were being prepared. Why should you ever question the accuracy of your sight? God didn't call you to blend in. He called you to break patterns and be the disruption in systems that serve deception. And that's exactly what you did before I formed you in the womb. I knew you in the womb, and before you were born, I consecrated you. Jeremiah 1:5 says that the calling wasn't random. Rather, it was embedded. Your very presence exposes falsehood. And when people are married to falsehood, their very presence exposes them. Their masks. Truth becomes a threat. That's why they turned on you. Not because you harmed them, but because you were a mirror. They couldn't escape. You didn't need to shout. You didn't need to prove anything. Your energy, your integrity, your unwavering alignment with truth. That was your evidence. Look at someone like Joan of Arc. Young, misjudged, ridiculed, but chosen. Her clarity shook kingdoms. And just like her, your instincts weren't hallucinations. They were heavenly downloads. And now the same people who tried to dim your light are fumbling in the dark, trying to figure out how you saw what they couldn't even feel. Don't waste your breath explaining. Don't try to adjust your frequency. For those who were never tuned to hear it, you were wired differently for a reason. The spiritual person judges all things, but is himself to be judged by no one. 1 Corinthians 2:15. They tried to measure you by standards you were never meant to follow, tried to box you in when you were built to break boundaries, but here's the truth. You didn't need to win their approval to be accurate. You didn't need confirmation to be correct. You were the walking confirmation. Remember Nikola? He once remarked, "If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy frequency and vibration." That's exactly how you operated. Tesla was a mind that was ahead of its time and was misunderstood by society. However, he was guided by a greater intelligence. They didn't understand your silence, your sense of timing, your sensitivity to shifts, because they couldn't decode divine frequency. But now that everything is falling apart, suddenly, your wavelength makes perfect sense. You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. Matthew 10:22. The mockery, the exile, the gaslighting. It was never a reflection of your weakness. It was confirmation of your calling. They thought they buried you in shame, but what they did was plant you in a soil. They weren't built to survive, and now the roots are showing. The community is spinning, shaken by the very voice they once tried to silence. And you're walking in the prophecy. You are the prophecy. Chosen. One, never mistake your silence for surrender, and never let anyone else twist it into weakness. What they called quiet was actually strategy. What they mocked as passivity was spiritual precision. You weren't avoiding confrontation. You were letting truth sharpen its blade. They misread you didn't. They thought your silence meant they won that. You were too emotional, too intense, too unwilling to just move on. But now the truth you carried is erupting in waves, and it's not asking for permission. It's not knocking gently. It's crashing in, because truth never forgets it, keeps receipts, and it moves fast when it's ready. You sounded the alarm, not because you wanted drama, but because you saw what others refused to face. They wanted you to stay quiet, because your clarity was cutting through every lie they decorated with charm. Let's be real. Have you ever noticed how crowds are more comfortable with a lie wrapped in performance than with truth spoken plainly? You never needed a spotlight. You didn't crave attention yet. Your very presence stripped illusions bare the moment you walked in. With clear sight, the fog had to vanish. They weren't offended by your actions. They were terrified of your accuracy, while they were setting the stage with smoke and mirrors. Your truth was the floodlight they couldn't dim. Think of whistleblowers like Frances Hogan, who exposed Facebook's internal secrets. She didn't shout or seek fame. She dropped undeniable evidence like her. Your truth didn't need noise. It needed only stillness and time. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. You didn't lift fists. You lifted frequency. You didn't scream. You spoke with clarity. That was your weapon. That is your weapon. And though they tried to tune you out, they're haunted now. Not by your words, but by your echo. That echo has woven itself through their backroom plans, their strained relationships, their quiet regrets. They can dodge your presence, but they cannot outrun the residue of what you revealed. How do you silence a mirror? That's what you became. Reflection, accountability, truth. And now every glance in your direction scorches, because it's no longer about you being right. It's about you no longer needing them to agree. Think of Cassandra from Greek mythology. You know what it's like to be ahead of the timeline, to be pivoted away from. Not because you were wrong, but because your truth arrived too early for their comfort. It was easier to exile you than to face what you forced into the light. But that fallout they avoided. It's raining down now. The system is collapsing, not with noise but with silence. Collapse doesn't always announce it's happening. She was given the gift of prophecy, but cursed to never be believed, despite the fact that she spoke truths that came to pass. She spoke truths that came to pass, but she was ridiculed until the very destruction she had foreseen itself. Sometimes it unfolds quietly, relentlessly, without need for a headline. And there you are standing in stillness, while everything false caves inward. For the word of the Lord is right and true. He is faithful in all he does. Psalm 33. Call 4. Chosen one. There is something sacred about how you carry your clarity. You don't chase validation. You don't demand applause. You just are. And in that being, the universe amplifies your frequency. Once you stopped explaining everything around you, began revealing itself. Lies can only stand for so long in the light and your silence. It wasn't empty. It was the hush of divine justice drawing its bowing. You were never overreacting. You were over-aware, and that awareness, it's a strength most will never grasp. Think of Malala Yousafzai, a teenage girl who simply wanted an education and refused to be silenced by oppression. Her voice became unstoppable, not because it was loud, but because it was true like her. You didn't need to overpower anyone. Your conviction was enough. And now the echoes of your warnings are undeniable. They bounce off the walls they once built to box you in. They cling to the air around those who once whispered against you. And the real sting, you never gloated. You never begged. You released. That's why it hits harder. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked for whatever one stubbles that will. He also reap. Galatians 6:7. You sowed truth, integrity, warning. They sowed denial, mockery, distraction. And now the harvest is here. Every false comfort they built is shaking under the weight of your silence. Your absence in their circles speaks louder than your presence ever did. And as you move with calm, they feel the hollowness. The same hush they once used to belittle you is now echoing with your unspoken, "I told you so." But you don't need revenge. You've got resonance. And that chosen one is a power that moves mountains. Have you noticed how those who once needed you gone now crave your insight? How the same voices that discredited your intuition are whispering behind closed doors, hoping you'll show up with answers again. But this time you know better. You're not here to rescue what resisted the rescue. You're here to walk in alignment. Your role was never about applause. It was about accuracy. And now, like a quiet storm that already passed, you move with knowledge, not noise. Let them feel the difference. Let them sit in the echo. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity, under the heavens. Ecclesiastes 3. Cole chapter 1. Your season of speaking is done. Now comes the unfolding. The confirmation written across every crumbling plan they once trusted in. They used noise as a weapon. You used silence as alignment. And while they're stunned by what's happening, you've already made peace with it, because you knew you felt it. You tried to tell them, and now your quiet has become thunder. It rumbles beneath the surface of every illusion and shakes loose what was never solid. Think about Rosa Parks. She didn't shout. She sat down and in her stillness shook the system. Her resistance was quiet, but her impact was seismic. That's the energy you carry, not aggression, alignment, not chaos, clarity, and now chosen one. The whole community is rattled, not because of anything new you've said, but because the silence they once mocked has come alive. It breathes, it speaks, and it confirms you were right the entire time. They pushed you aside to protect their polished narrative. Chosen one not because you were wrong, but because your presence made the cracks visible. They were not prepared for your clarity, your refusal to perform, or your unwillingness to pretend that you were not some odd piece that didn't belong. You were the truth. They were unable to blend into their illusion. The moment your spirit walked in and made the room feel too real. Exile was not an accident. It was a strategy. They plotted your removal like a calculated defense, not against chaos, but against the kind of clarity that breaks masks in silence. You were a mirror that was not warped or distorted. It was just too clean for comfort. And the reflection you showed them hit nerves that they had spent years learning to ignore. Ignore you became the glitch in their scripted show, the frequency they couldn't mute. The whole system was stitched together by performance-forced peace, fake smiles, roles everyone agreed to play. But you walked in holding, not questions, but answers. You didn't need a title to see through the games. You smelled the rot behind the rehearsal. You spotted the decay, dressed up in approval and applause. And they knew, if you stayed, the whole crowd might start seeing it too. So they acted. First came the jokes laced with sarcasm, then the whispers, then the unease. Whenever you spoke, not because you offended, but because you revealed. And when a lie has too much to lose, the truth becomes a virus. Their only option was quarantine, and you were the carrier. Does that sound familiar? Have you ever felt the air change when you enter a room? Felt the way eyes shift, or how silence grows heavy when you speak? It wasn't your imagination. It was spiritual frequency. Like Galileo, whose discoveries threatened the beliefs of his time, you too carried a truth that made people tremble. He was condemned not because he was incorrect, but because his insight disrupted the entire worldview of those in power. And just like him, they did not silence you because they misunderstood you. Rather, they silenced you because they understood you too well. They saw how you were not swayed by status, how ranks and robes and roles did not move you, how your discernment cut through costumes. You were not fooled, and this made you dangerous to the script. A soul that will not be steered cannot be staged. Therefore, they threw you out, not to punish rebellion, but rather to eliminate the one who couldn't be recruited into the lie. Am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ, according to Galatians 1:10. The truth is that they were unable to shape you. They were unable to predict you, and the moment they realized they couldn't use you, they moved to erase you. However, here's the twist. What they tried to erase only became sharper while they brokered influence through fear and performance. You were being carved by isolation, and that isolation did not break you. Rather, it built you, honed your senses, and deepened your sight. Now, from a distance, you are able to see things more clearly. Distance. They watch your rise with trembling feet, hoping that your light will remain small, but feeling the ground shift every time your name is mentioned. Think of Nelson Mandela, who was exiled and imprisoned, not because he was a threat to order, but because his freedom exposed the injustice of the system. His absence amplified his cause, and the silence they forced upon him became his megaphone. In the same way, your exile was not a sentence. It was a stage reset. You were not thrown away. You were pulled aside, hidden for refinement, and safeguarded from harm. From spiritual infections, false alliances, and smiling deception while they mocked your absence, heaven was positioning your presence in plain sight, and all the while you questioned your worth because the applause faded. However, you should ask yourself why those who are addicted to illusions would ever hand the microphone to someone who is committed to the truth. He who vindicates me is close by, who then will bring charges against me. Let us face each other. Who is my accuser? Let him confront me, says Isaiah 58. The truth is that they did not exile weakness. Rather, they expelled dangerous strength when they were unable to debate you. They deleted you. But strength like yours does not disappear. It lingers, it echoes, and it haunts. And now every sentence you have ever spoken is crawling back into their thoughts. This is not out of admiration. Rather, it is out of dread, because everything is unfolding. Every scene, every line, every truth you dropped is playing out not in secret, but in plain view. Take, for example, the case of Erin Brockovich, a whistleblower who was not a lawyer and who was not formally trained, but she saw through the lies of a corporation, pursued the truth, and exposed corruption that affected thousands of people. Ignore her tried to minimize her, but her accuracy and persistence became too loud to contain. That's your energy, the one they tried to shut down. Now hums through their broken strategies and the hush they chose over your warning. It's louder than thunder. Now it's cracking their windows, shaking their plans, waking their guilt. No weapon that is formed against you shall prosper, and every tongue that shall rise against you in judgment, you shall condemn. Isaiah 54:17. You were never overreacting. You were aligned. You were carrying spiritual X-ray vision in a room that was decorated with glitter and glue. And while they laughed, they were praying that your accuracy wouldn't hold. But it did. And now they are gasping in the smoke of the house that they built on hush. You tried to warn them not to gain credit, but because you genuinely hoped that they would turn, you stood at the edge of the cliff and pointed away from destruction. However, there are some lessons that don't land until the teacher walks away and the floor collapses. Take, for example, the story of Princess Diana, who was pushed to the edge of royal life because her authenticity threatened a curated image. But the world loved her, not for how she followed rules, but for how she refused to fake her way through fame. In the end, her truth outshined the institutions that tried to silence it like her. You were never meant to survive by shrinking. You were designed to rise by revealing so chosen one. Stop labeling your separation as a wound. It was a womb, a chamber where purpose developed in silence. You weren't cast out. You were consecrated, separated for sanctity, pulled away from corruption before it could pollute your calling. Let them replay your words in private. Let them feel the cold truth settle into the hollowness they once filled with fantasy. Let them sit in the smoke of the kingdom they built on false harmony. This isn't vengeance, it's verification. You were the signal they tried to bury, and now your echo is unstoppable. Chosen one, hold your head high, not out of pride, but out of peace. You walk with the kind of clarity that doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. You were never meant to shrink yourself into places that required you to betray your intuition. You know those rooms, the ones where your truth made the air stiff, the ones where everyone smiled, but no one saw. Those places were never meant to hold someone like you. You weren't created to blend into a crowd, addicted to easy answers and comfortable lies. You were born to disrupt, to illuminate, to walk with the kind of presence that convicts without a single word. That's why you were set apart, not rejected, redirected. Your exile wasn't abandonment. It was elevation, disguised as silence. Do you ever find yourself wondering why your departure from certain circles felt more like a release than a loss? This is because you were being pulled into higher alignment, just like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who refused to conform to societal norms that demanded silence in exchange for acceptance. He did not bend to comfort the crowd. Instead, he spoke what was needed, even if it meant losing popularity, safety, and peace. You have done the same thing. You were called away not because you were difficult, but because you were too honest for environments that were designed to reward denial. And that separation, it was heaven's billboard reading: redirect, not rejection, not failure, just a turn toward purpose. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Proverbs 35:6. They didn't understand what you carried. They thought you were arrogant for trusting your discernment. They labeled your boundaries as attitude. They mistook your refusal to play along for rebellion. But what they couldn't accept was that you saw, and once you see clearly, you can't pretend blindness. You didn't answer their call for help with a performance. You showed up raw, unfiltered, heaven-backed, and that shook them. They asked for rain, and when it came through your presence, they cursed the flood. But you didn't bring destruction. You brought truth. Think of Brené Brown, who speaks openly about shame and vulnerability in a culture that prefers polished perfection. She wasn't welcomed at first. Her work was dismissed by those who couldn't handle the power of honesty. Yet her voice grew, not because she conformed. They wanted encouragement, but only if it was sugar-coated. They asked for transformation, but only if it didn't threaten their image. You couldn't meet that request, not because you didn't care, but because you refused to lie. Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you. For that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets Luke. But because she remained true to what resonated deeply with her, you didn't water down the message to make it more palatable. You showed up as a mirror, clear, reflective, and unafraid. You showed up as a mirror, clear, reflective, and unafraid. 626. You weren't made for applause. You were made for alignment. The circle that once flinched at your energy is slowly circling back, not because they've changed, but because the script has flipped the stage. They once guarded with pride is buckling under the weight of truth, denied, and now the very compass they laughed at is the one they're trying to trace again. But here's the twist. You're the one who decides if the gate reopens, because your value isn't just in what you offer, it's in knowing when not to offer it anymore. Think of Maya Angelou. Her voice, her truth, her poetry was not always celebrated. It caused people to feel uncomfortable. It peeled back layers that society attempted to conceal. However, that discomfort was the exact medicine that the world required. You have been the same. You did not show up with flattery. You did not dip your truth in sugar in order to avoid offending others. You showed up in full light, and that light caused their masks to itch. You did not turn people away because you failed to deliver. Rather, you turned them away because you delivered too much. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Matthew 5:14. Your insight. Something you rehearsed. It wasn't curated to impress. It was divine, and it was ready to shake loose every lie that people had grown accustomed to living with. That was what shook them up. Not that you were off track, but that you were too on target. They prayed for answers. You brought them. They asked for clarity. You spoke it. But it didn't come how they expected it to come through you. And the truth is that they weren't ready to see what you reflected. Take, for example, Keanu Reeves, who is quiet, intentional, and different. He is frequently misunderstood because he doesn't play baseball, the Hollywood game. But behind the calm exterior is deep wisdom and fierce integrity. He's not trying to be popular. He's living in alignment. That's you. You're not trying to please crowds. You're trying to stay faithful to the vision God placed inside you. And now that the noise has settled, your silence has become sacred. Your absence has become a lesson, and your presence. It's still echoing in rooms you no longer enter. It's the classic reaction, isn't it? Chosen one. Reject the medicine because it doesn't taste sweet. They couldn't stomach the truth because it didn't come dipped in honey. But now the sugar coating has worn off, and what's left is fire buried. Landmines are going off beneath their carefully constructed foundations. What once looked like solid ground is trembling beneath exposed secrets, crumbling facades, and the public collapse of those who once looked untouchable. Their idols are falling, cycles of deception are burning, and the consequences, they're showing up right on time, unapologetic and precise. While all of this unfolds, your silence hums louder than their recycled applause. You aren't speaking, but your past words are haunting them. Every sentence you once offered dismissed as dramatic. Or, you have to ask yourself how many warnings you were forced to swallow just because your delivery wasn't soft enough for their egos. Have you ever wondered why your voice felt too strong for their comfort, even when you weren't trying to shout? This is because you didn't speak from a place of performance. Rather, you spoke from an encounter, like Malcolm X, who was often a prophet. This is now resonating through their minds like a prophecy, and they have realized that this wasn't something you read in a book. It arrived from the nights you wrestled alone from pain, from awakening, from divine downloads. No degree can replicate this, labeled too aggressive by a world that didn't want to face the fire of truth. He didn't speak softly to soothe systems, he spoke sharply to shift them. And so did you. You didn't show up with pre-approved lines. You showed up with flame in your eyes and truth in your gut. They were expecting deliverance to arrive, dressed in a robe of softness. But it came through you, sharp, confronting, unapologetic. And when they slammed the door, they didn't realize they locked out the very breakthrough they begged God to send. But how often do people sabotage the very help they prayed for, just because it didn't come in the costume they imagined? Have I now become your enemy by telling you the truth? Galatians 4:16. That verse lives in your bones. They weren't offended by lies. You never told any. They were offended by the tone of the truth, the force of it, the timing of it. Because you didn't just show up with insight. You showed up early. You brought clarity before they were ready to see. You saw through the game, before they even admitted they were playing one. That's what it means to be chosen. You strike before the target's even painted. You hit the alarm before the smoke reaches the ceiling. And because of that, they accused you of stirring trouble, when in fact, you were the very one trying to stop the collapse. What happens when people realize the troublemaker was actually the life raft? Think about Greta Thunberg. She was mocked, minimized, even ridiculed for sounding the climate alarm too early, too loudly. But now the very systems that laughed are implementing the strategies she begged them to consider. You were mocked too, brushed aside, made to feel out of place. And now they scroll silently through your progress, while their own lives unspool at the seams. Not because you cursed them, but because they ignored the clarity you carried, the disruption you brought. Wasn't chaos, it was alignment. But alignment is painful for those clinging to pretense. You didn't miss, you were just early. That's why they feared you, not because you were wrong, but because you were right, before they were ready to admit it. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Psalm 118:22. And now chosen one. They stand in the wreckage, realizing the answer they exiled was the very shield they were praying for. You weren't wrong. You were never off. You were the right one, sent at the wrong time for them. And now time itself has caught up with you. Every sentence you ever whispered in the shadows is now on full display, and every warning you gave without applause is now rolling out like clockwork. The very presence they once resisted is now the blueprint they're scrambling to imitate. Isn't it wild how the very truth they buried now sits at the center of their crumbling plans? Think of Chelsea Manning, a whistleblower who exposed systems from within, not for applause, but out of conviction. She faced isolation, rejection, and exile not because of her actions, but because she was a whistleblower. She lied. But because the truth that she revealed required accountability that was too heavy for the system to bear. And that is also your story. Your assignment was not to entertain or be adored. Rather, it was to confront, correct, and expose you. You were not their mascot. You were not their cheerleader. You were their mirror, and mirrors are terrifying when people aren't ready to see themselves. God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, regardless of whether it is good or evil, according to Ecclesiastes 12:14. Now, that judgment is not mystical. It's visible exposure. It's exact. The hourglass they ignored is out of sand, and now they're running back your words like lifelines. Let them. Let them scroll in silence. Let the proof play out in real time. Not because you're spiteful, but because truth doesn't need vengeance. It has evidence, and the evidence is you. You delivered the memo. You rang the bell. You did your part. And now are you ready to stop apologizing for the role? Heaven wrote specifically for your voice. Do you remember the story of the prophet Jeremiah, called to deliver a word no one wanted to hear, mocked, imprisoned, rejected? Yet every warning he gave came true, exactly as spoken. He wasn't sent to be liked. He was sent to be accurate. So were you, and now chosen one. This is your season of confirmation. No more explaining. No more proving. Let the silence speak. Let the fallout settle. Let the exposed systems gasp for air. You were the early thunder. The one they didn't applaud, the one they tried to, and they delete. And now every shattered illusion is proof. You were always the signal that the games were over. They didn't turn away from you because you lacked light. Chosen one. They turned because you carried too much of it, too soon, too brightly, too unfiltered for their comfort. You arrived not as a problem, but as the answer, before they even admitted they had a problem. And when people are still clinging to denial, truth feels like disruption. You weren't too much. You were right on time. They were simply unprepared. And now that the excuses have crumbled and the distractions have quieted, what's left? Silence. And in that silence, your voice now echoes louder than it ever did when they were shouting you down. Isn't it strange how silence grows loud once the truth finally settles in? They blamed you for the fire, but you weren't the flame. You were the alarm, the siren wailing before the smoke filled the room. They accused you of stirring chaos. But all you did was refuse to call emergency sirens late as you saw what others ignored, felt the tremors in the ground, long before the quake hit you. Were never the disaster. You were the announcement of it, and what did they do? They cursed the alarm instead of preparing for the blaze. But how many lives could be spared if people listened to the one yelling fire? Instead of silencing them, the moment you crossed their thresholds, the atmosphere changed. You are aware of this sensation because you have witnessed it in their eyes. The smiles became tighter, the conversations became more tense, and the energy became strange. This was not because you were hostile. Rather, it was because you did not bow to dysfunction. Your peace roared, and their illusion of calm cracked. They were not angry because you caused the storm. Rather, they were angry because you saw it while they were still hiding the clouds behind scripted smiles and painted sets. Unity on fragile veneers, and you, just by being honest, threatened to tear it all down. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. Ephesians 5:13. That's what you are. A light that didn't ask for permission to shine. You didn't need to speak volumes. Your presence alone was enough to rattle their set design, while they tried to create artificial harmony. You came in radiating authenticity. That's why they slapped the storm label on you. Because when someone, When someone sees through the system panics. And when someone can't be deceived, they can't be controlled. How many times have you been rejected? Not because you caused harm, but because you refused to pretend that things were okay when they weren't? Think of Serena Williams. At times, the world labeled her too much simply because she was dominant, vocal, and passionate. However, the truth is that she just carried greatness that couldn't be dimmed. People fear what they can't box in like her. You weren't there to ruffle feathers. You were there to fulfill your purpose. But purpose has a way of shaking up pretense. And so they reacted with fear instead of gratitude. They didn't want the alarm. They wanted a quiet collapse. They could spin as an accident. The eyes of the Lord are in every place, keeping watch on the evil and the good. Proverbs 15:3. You had spiritual surveillance, eyes that saw what was being swept under the rug. You sensed betrayal, read energies, and picked up on secrets people had hidden behind years of performance. And you did all this without a title or a seat at their table. That's what scared them most. You carried discernment that couldn't be silenced by paperwork or politics. And in a world where illusion is often mistaken for peace, your raw awareness felt like a threat. Why does truth feel like chaos? To those who've made comfort out of pretending, when they couldn't silence the alarm, they tried to destroy you. But even after they tried to unplug your voice, remove you from the room, and erase your credibility, the chaos they feared came anyway. Not because you summoned it, but because they refused to heed your warning. The storm wasn't your doing. It was already on the way. You were just trying to get them to prepare. And now the chaos is on. Center stage, tearing through their fabricated storylines. Bonds are snapping. Masks are falling. The myth of unity is peeling like old paint. Consider the story of whistleblower Jeffrey Wagen, the man who exposed the tobacco industry's lies. He wasn't welcomed. He was attacked. But in the end, what he revealed saved lives and dismantled a dangerous system. You've done something similar. You weren't popular, but you were right. You weren't invited, but you were necessary. The very mouths that once called you a people who cause trouble are now murmuring, "Why didn't anyone warn us for this?" And the answer is simple. Someone did it. How many tragedies could have been avoided if people hadn't rejected the truth simply because of the vessel it came in for? It is time for judgment to begin with God's household first, according to Peter 4:17. The judgment that is happening now isn't eternal. It's internal. The systems that rejected you are now falling apart, and the echo of your warnings is louder than ever. They are realizing too late that the voice they silenced was the reality, only one bold enough to save them. You didn't fail. You fulfilled. You delivered what they didn't want to hear because you were chosen not to comfort dysfunction, but to confront it, not to maintain peace, but to expose false peace. Think about Robin Williams. He made the world laugh while carrying deep truths about pain and struggle. People adored the mask, but few were ready for the depth behind it. Like him, your truth carried layers. They weren't willing to explore. They wanted simplicity. You brought soul. They wanted agreement. You brought accuracy. So what? Now, chosen one. Now, you let the silence do the speaking. You've already said what needed to be said. You rang the alarm. You stood your ground. You bore the cost of clarity. And now as the storm tears through their pretend calm, you don't need to say, "I told you so." Your peace says it for you. Will you finally stop apologizing for the intensity of your discernment and recognize it as a gift God gave for protection, not popularity? You never sugarcoated it. Chosen one. You didn't dress your message up in soft phrases or deliver it in packaging made to please the crowd. You gave it straight, unfiltered, unshaken, unbent. And because you didn't match their carefully curated image, of what truth was supposed to look or sound like. They threw it all away, truth and messenger alike. They didn't just reject your message, they rejected you, because your voice didn't flatter their illusions. But let's make one thing clear. That's not on you. That's on them. How many people choose lies just because the truth shows up without the costume they were hoping for? And when the doubt creeps in, and it will remember that your unease was never an overreaction. Rather, it was divine detection. You were not stirring up drama. You were refusing to swim in contaminated waters. You did not start the chaos. You simply refused to remain silent about it in places where fake order is mistaken for peace. Anyone who senses too much, sees too deeply, or names things too clearly is always labeled as being too intense, too sensitive, or too much. However, now the very floor they tap danced across is collapsing beneath them. Their secrets are vomiting into the daylight. They are refusing to stories are unraveling like worn-out scripts, and those whispers they all carry. Your name, do not call conspiracy. Everything. This people calls a conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, and do not dread it. The Lord Almighty is the one you are to regard as holy. Isaiah 8:12-13. They mocked you for being the one who felt the tremor. First, they rolled their eyes when you pointed out the cracks in their foundation. But now that the walls are breaking and the air is thick with consequences, guess who? They can't stop thinking about you, and not just because you were right, but because you stood firm. You walked out without screaming. You left with your voice intact, and now your absence cuts deeper than your presence ever did. Why does the silence of a truth-teller feel louder than the noise of an entire crowd? Once the smoke rolls in, think of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. For years she spoke against injustice in rooms filled with people who refused to see the imbalance. She wasn't always applauded, but she kept her stance, knowing that clarity without compromise eventually shifts everything you did. The same, your job was never to win votes in those rooms. Your role was divine interruption. You weren't designed to be the peacekeeper of a toxic dynamic. You were made to sound the alarm, even if no one wanted to hear it. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Matthew 5:10. You weren't supposed to fit in those places. Your very existence threatened to wake people who were addicted to sleep. Your clarity made their illusions impossible to maintain. They wanted you to water yourself down, to second-guess what you sensed, to quiet that inner radar for the sake of keeping everyone comfortable. But comfort for them was built on lies. And you had the nerve to speak what others only dared to feel. Think of Dr. Anthony Fauci. During the pandemic, whether praised or criticized, he stayed firm. He didn't always say what people wanted to hear, but he consistently told the truth, even when the crowd wasn't ready. Like him, you carried the hard clarity. You walked in early, named the storm, before the thunder even rolled in, and they panicked, not because you were wrong, but because you confirmed what they were too afraid to face. Why do people curse the mirror when what they really fear is their own reflection? And now the fire that they denied is dancing at their doors. It is humming your tune, which is eerily familiar and undeniably yours. They did not hate the storm. They hated the fact that you named it first, and yet you never gloated. You did not drag the disaster in. You did not ask for credit. You were simply courageous enough to stand up and say, "This isn't okay." And now every flame flickering in their windows is a sentence they once dismissed from your mouth. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Revelation 2:29. You were tuned in. You heard the Spirit when no one else was listening. You felt the shift in the room, caught the nervous glances, saw the smiles that didn't reach their eyes. And when it was time to choose between silence and conviction, you chose truth. They hugged the crowd. You held the truth. They played innocent while the curtains caught fire. And now they ask, why didn't anyone warn us? People will continue to act as if they have never heard the thing for how long. But someone did you do? Siren. Just because they didn't like the sound of the person ringing the bell, think of John the Baptist. He cried out in the wilderness, preparing the way, and he was ridiculed by many people. However, he didn't need the approval of the temple. He wasn't sent for applause. He was sent for alignment. That's you. You didn't show up in soft robes and pleasant tones. You showed up raw and righteous, and you were prepared to be misunderstood. However, the fire still came, and your words, which were once laughed off, are now replaying in their minds like a prophecy fulfilled, thanks to your courage, chosen one. The silence around you to pick a side. It turned bystanders into co-signers. It transformed hesitation into complicity. Suddenly, everyone who stayed quiet wasn't neutral. They were standing on the side of the lie. They saw the injustice. They felt the tension. They sensed the betrayal in the room. But rather than risk their reputation, they left you to carry the burden of truth alone. They acted blind while watching the fallout unfold. But deep down, they felt the tremors in their spirit. They just valued their seat at the table, more than seeing the table rebuilt. How many people do you know who call it peace, when in reality, they just don't want to lose access? They smiled in staged unity, hiding behind polite nods and passive prayers, while you were bleeding truth in silence. They calculated that access, image, and staying in favor were worth more than integrity, honesty, or conscience. And so they let you get singled out, labeled, branded. They watched you carry wounds they were too scared to acknowledge, let alone touch. Then they slipped back into their routines, hoping no one would remember their silence. But silence, it's never neutral. Every shrug, every whisper of just let it go, every choice to stay comfortable while you stood alone. It was all a vote for the system, now collapsing before their very eyes. Why do so many choose the quiet of comfort, when the noise of truth could have saved them? Whoever knows the right thing to do, and fails to do it for him, it is sin. James 4:17. Now the structure they protected is crumbling. Their patches are leaking. Their rehearsed lines are cracking under the pressure of reality. And there you are, clear-rooted, unwavering, not because you were better, but because you chose truth, when truth cost the most. You were never the threat. You were the siren. And now time is testifying. Every line you ever whispered under your breath is now echoing in full surround sound. The universe delivered the receipts you never asked for. Their silence wasn't indecision, it was fear. Fear of being the next target. Fear of walking that lonely road with no map. Have you ever noticed how people act like they didn't hear the siren until the fire is too big to ignore? But still, you walked alone, wounded, but faithful. And now your steps are echoing like a divine alarm clock. They can't snooze. They can't spin the narrative anymore. What do you do when the people who watched you bleed come crawling back? Not with an apology, but with excuses. For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known. The smoke is too thick. The evidence is too loud. And people who once called you too much, too intense, or too dramatic are now pacing their halls, repeating your words in their minds, wishing they had listened. They wanted the wisdom that your gift offered, but not the responsibility that came along with it. They wanted the fruit of your vision, but not the cost of planting it. Now the invoice has arrived, and it includes interest. So, what do you do when the people who watched you bleed come crawling back? Brought out into the open. Luke 8:17. Let the record be clear. You weren't the divider. You were the decider. You weren't paranoid. You were prophetic. You weren't rebellious. You were real. What's collapsing now isn't just false systems. It's the image of everyone who helped preserve them. Your pain became the mirror, and they flinched. not because you were unstable, but because you were accurate. While they clasped hands in public prayers, you were in back rooms, bleeding wounds inflicted by the same hands, pretending holiness. The stage was polished, but the backstage was soaked with secrets they never wanted exposed. Think about Simone Biles, who withdrew from Olympic competition in order to protect her mental health. Critics referred to her as weak until she revealed the truth, which forced a global conversation. She said, "You weren't fragile. You were revealing your wounds. They weren't signs of failure. They were certifications." This is because pain reveals what performance conceals. Pain reveals what applause conceals. And in your lowest moments, the truth about everyone around you surfaced. Some offered comfort that felt more like dismissal, while others smirked in the face of the truth. Corners labeling your hurt as divine payback. But the universe saw. Why is it that suffering reveals more character in others than success ever does? The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. Heaven recorded every cold glance, every forced smile, every "I'll pray for you" that sounded more like distance than compassion. And now those dismissals have become evidence, silent witness statements, etched in spirit, written in ink. No apology can scrub clean. And as the secrets pour into the light like floodwaters, the same people who ignored the fire alarm are coughing in the smoke. They're rewriting the narrative, claiming neutrality, claiming they didn't want to meddle. But the logs don't lie. Their silence was a sound the universe never forgot. Think about Edward Snowden. He paid a heavy price for speaking up. But now the very governments that dismissed him are slowly validating his every claim. Your story is similar. Your pain wasn't wasted, it witnessed. And now here you stand, scarred. Yes, but upright, unfolding. Not just a survivor, but a revealer. You didn't crumble. You evolved. You let your wounds become wisdom. You let betrayal teach you what applause never could. And the very people who framed your struggle as instability, they're watching their own foundations shake you. Intended to harm me. But God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. Genesis 50:20. Don't hand them an eraser. Now, don't let them rewrite your legacy. Let them sit in the fire of what they refused to face. Your suffering didn't expose your weakness. It exposed their hypocrisy. And now let them see it. Let them feel it. Let them sit with the echo of everything they tried to silence. You didn't need revenge. You needed reveal. And now that it's here, stand tall. Because the truth didn't just vindicate you. It required you. And you delivered beloved chosen ones you didn't come into their lives to bring. Because the lights are on, the curtains are pulled back, and the truth is the center of the stage. And it looks a lot like you. So, chosen one, will you stop viewing your scars as a source of shame and begin viewing them as signatures of survival? Destruction. You came to prevent it. You were the siren, not the storm. You sounded the alarm because you saw what was festering beneath the surface long before anyone dared to name it. You felt the shaking before the collapse. And when they labeled you too much, too intense, too sensitive, it wasn't because you were wrong. It was because you were right. Too early. Calm made them feel safe, even if it was built on lies. But calm, built on decay, always ends in disaster. You didn't force the walls to fall. You warned them that they were already cracking. They called it noise because it didn't suit their narrative. But noise didn't break their foundations. Truth did the truth. They ignored the truth you carried. And now, as the roof caves in and illusions splinter like glass, they no longer dismiss your name with a smirk. They speak it with respect, laced with the bitterness of hindsight. The voice they once cast aside has become the compass. They wish they hadn't silenced, because your voice wasn't volume, it was vision. You never wanted control. You wanted clarity. You weren't looking to lead by force. You were sent to awaken by fire. But awakening is uncomfortable, and choice. Comfort. You were not defeated when you walked away. You were wise. You did not retreat. You repositioned. You stepped aside, not because you gave up, but because they weren't listening. And now the storm that they thought would never come has arrived. And it came exactly as you described it. Doesn't it speak volumes when the same words that they rejected now ring like prophecy? You didn't need to say, "I told you so." You didn't need to say, "I told you so." And their panic says it for you. The same people who laughed are now pacing in silence, replaying every moment they could have responded differently. But the lesson wasn't for them alone. It was also for you, that your discernment was divine, that your clarity wasn't arrogance. It was alignment, that your instincts weren't exaggeration. They were early evidence. So now the question is, will you finally believe what your spirit knew all along, even when no one else did? Let the fallout unfold. Let every collapsing story be a tribute to the warning you gave, with nothing but your voice and your courage. Let every whisper of, "Maybe they were right," find its way back to you, not as flattery, but as confirmation. You didn't need their platform to speak truth. Truth carried you. You didn't need their invitation. Heaven had already deployed. Can you feel it now? The weight lifting from your shoulders. That was never yours to carry. You were the messenger. That's all. And you fulfilled the mission. You are not there. Ruin you. Were the opportunity. They rejected you. Were the detour. They ignored. And now in the rubble, your voice is the only one still echoing. They can rewrite their memories, but they are unable to erase what is happening right in front of them. Let them watch, let them wonder, and let them reflect, because even now, your absence is speaking just as loudly as your presence once did. Therefore, walk forward without apologizing, not with bitterness, but with blessing. You did not lose them. They lost alignment. You did not miss your calling. They missed your value. And even if they reach out to you now, repost your words, or pretend they never doubted you, remember who remained silent when you were the only one speaking, who truly stood up for you, with you in the quiet, when standing cost everything. If this message stirred something in you, if it brought clarity, comfort, or courage, I invite you to pass it along to someone else, walking that same lonely road of truth. Let them know they're not alone, that the storm was never their fault, that being the siren was always sacred. And to all of you who have stood by this channel, who have listened, supported, and loved this space into being, we thank you deeply. Your presence means more than we can say. If you'd like to support us further, you can do so by clicking the Super Thanks button below this video. Whether you choose to donate or not, know this: you are appreciated. You are seen. You are part of this movement, this message, this mission. Your encouragement fuels what we do, and every view, every comment, every bit of support matters more than you know. We bless you with discernment that never dims courage, that keeps standing, and peace that doesn't depend on the crowd. Thank you for walking this path with us. Until next time, be safe, stay wise, and keep walking in truth. We'll see you in the next video. Take care, and may blessings follow you wherever you go.